Hello there, I am Man in Yellow, and in this video I want to talk a bit about map design in Phobies. Map design is something that I think has been an issue for a very long time. Some would maybe even argue since the launch of the game, but that depends on how you look at it. It is an issue that is often overshadowed and talked less about compared to a lot of the other problems in the game, such as the phobie balance, the new player experience, the rewards, the matchmaking, and the rank system, which people talk about quite a lot and discuss how to do things about. But map design is actually extremely important if you ask me. I would even go as far as to say that the map design is more important than phobie balance in most cases, as long as there isn't like a completely broken phobie like unreleased Le Shovel or No Luck Cupcake, which obviously could not stay in the game. But outside of that, I think map design should be considered more important. The reason why I think it is so important is because every time you queue up, you're obviously going to be playing on a map. And whether that is a good map or a bad map has a huge impact on how much fun you're going to have. If you're playing on a well-designed map, you are much more likely to have an interesting and memorable experience that will keep you coming back to the game, as compared to a bad map, which will make you want to go play something else. Now, I will say this is less of a problem for you if you are a lower ranked player, like if you're in Doomsday or below. You probably don't really know what you're doing anyway, so who really cares what the optimal play is? But as you get further into the game, you will start to realize how big of a problem some of these maps are and how boring they can be to play on. So eventually this becomes a problem for anyone as they get better at the game. Unless you don't get better, in which case, well, you don't really have this problem. But for all like high rank players, this is a huge problem in the game. For high rank players, this is like probably the biggest problem, I would say. This is like something that can completely ruin your experience with Phobies. The reason why I'm making this video now, I was planning to do it at some point anyway, but why I'm making it right now is because they just added a new map to the game called HR Violation, and it is really bad in my opinion. It's to the point where I would say that this map is a contender for being the worst map ever made. And that says a lot because they've made some really bad maps along the way. So this is like absolute trash in my opinion. Before I get into why I think this is so bad though, I will first talk a little bit about what I think makes a map actually good. And to simplify it a lot, what makes a map good is essentially just that you are encouraging players to interact with each other. You will hear the same thing if you ask most high rank players. The things that make a map fun is having multiple contestable panic points, having a heart that you can actually approach, and having enough space to fight with the opponent. Because if all three of these things exist on a map, then you will constantly have a back and forth and actually be fighting over space. Whereas if they are not true, then you will likely end up with a map like this, where the optimal play is to just sit back and do nothing, and then you build up a lot of keys and you create this like super team that just tries to nuke the opponent somehow and straight up just kill them in one turn without interacting with them. And that is not very fun for either player, because you are first of all sitting for like 10 to 15 turns and doing absolutely nothing. Second of all, the game ends in a single turn, so there's no fun to be had really. It just says boom and the game is over. And it is also just not really interesting because you get the same match over and over and over again, since people are just going to be using the same combo on the map almost every time. And that gets boring really fast after you've done like an Akira combo or Phantom combo the 50th time on the same map. You don't really want to do that anymore. And then you go play something else most likely. So that is why those kind of maps are really bad. Also, I should mention, when I say contestable panic points, these are points that are equally easy for both players to take and hold, or equally hard, depending on what you want to say. And that means that they are usually in the same range from both players' vault. If you're looking at a map like this, first of all, we have these corner panic points. which obviously the player that is near the panic point is only going to be able to take. Like the red player here can walk directly up here in one turn and take the point. and they will very easily be able to defend it. Whereas if the blue player wanted to go to that point, they have to go all the way like this to get to it, which is just never going to happen because you're getting that close to the opponent's vault, and they're just going to summon something and kill whatever you're walking in there with. So on a map like this, you can never take the corner point. And whenever you look at these points in the middle, you can't even really contest these either, because they are in range of a 2-range 2-mover Phobie. So you can just straight up walk out here and kill whatever the opponent places there immediately, and then replace it with a 1-key, and they will essentially only have held the point for a single tick of damage. So there's just no reason to really trade keys at that point. Also, you are very likely to just like put a turret on this tile here, and then you can always just kill whatever is going there. And there's no like real interaction between the players, because you can't really attack the turret either. That is the next thing. There really isn't enough space to fight on this map either, because you have 3 obstacles in the middle here, which means you only have these tight spaces to go through and fight the opponent on. On top of that, there is also a ton on lava here, on both players' sides obviously. And that makes it even harder to go ahead and fight, because you have to set your phobies on lava, which puts you at a disadvantage when fighting. So you are even less encouraged to actually be proactive and fight the opponent. So on a map like this, you are just going to sit back and do one giant combo and end the game. And that is really unfun. And that is why I think this is really bad. Because not only does this break 1 rule or 2 rules, this breaks all 3 of those rules for making a map where players actually fight each other. And that is really bad. Okay, and now for the second part of the video, rather than just having 7 minutes of me taking a dump on HR violation, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other maps in the game. So I have gone in here into PatoReys map creator, and I have created 3 of what I would say are bad maps and 3 of what I would say are good maps. So we're going to go through those, and then I will go into a blank map creator here and talk a little bit more about some of the concepts that I already talked about before. First off, we have Toys in the Attic, or Trash in the Attic as I'm calling it. This is arguably the worst map ever created. It's on par with how bad IHR violation is, if not worse. This is just terrible in every single way. You have 1 contestable panic point in the middle, 2 uncontestable panic points way out on the sides here. You have a ton of poison that makes it so that players can't really fight at all. You have a conveyor tile going down into an abyss, which means that you are not going to go near that side of the map. You have a defensive stim pad and a defensive healing spa that makes it even easier to be defensive. You have the hearts sitting way back on the map, so you can't even really get to them, because as the red player, are you really going to walk all of this way to the heart when the opponent just has to do this? No, you're not. That's never going to happen. So what you saw on this map back when it was still being put in the game, we haven't seen it in rotation in a very long time because they have taken it out. But back when it was still in, was that players were just going to sit back and they were banking for something huge. They either brought some kind of combo thing where they bring like Akira with some very big phobies that benefit from being pulled by Akira, or they bring something like a Blastomatic with some other huge phobies and maybe a pull as a supporter or something like that, and they just try to overwhelm the opponent with stats. And both of those playstyles are very boring, so that is why Toys in the Attic was considered a terrible map by pretty much everyone who ever played on it. It is a very, very badly designed map. You literally only have this line where you can actually walk on if you don't want to sit on poison, which is quite terrible. You have the same kind of thing with HR violation. Next up, I want to talk about Fernasified, which is another bad map. This has several of the same issues, but the main issue that I want to highlight here is that it forces you to go for one specific phobie, because you are almost always going to see both players going for Gravedigger here. If someone is not going for Gravedigger, they are pretty much just playing with a handicap here, because you like breaking these blocks around here, depending on whether you are one player or the other, is just way too important. It allows you to actually play the game. It allows you to take the middle easily for no reason. You can just take it with like a 2 movement 1 key suddenly, and it just gives you a lot like more flexibility in how you move your phobies around and how you position. So you're always going to go Gravedigger here. Top of that, we still have the same thing with like the panic points being too far out on the sides and the heart sitting so far back into the map that it's very hard to get to it and things like that. So it has a lot of other issues too. I just wanted to highlight how you pretty much always go Gravedigger and do this, and then afterwards you like break even more of these blocks. So the map just ends up looking like this, which is obviously a very, very bad map. Then we have Hall of Mirrors. Hall of Mirrors' main problem is that if you look at the vaults, they are further into the map than they are on a lot of other maps. Normally you see the the vaults in the corners, and that is because it is way easier to design a decent map when the vaults are in the corners. That's not to say that it's impossible to make one where the vault is in other places. It is just harder, and you have to go to some pretty drastic measures to do so. Like if you have the vault set somewhere in here, then you have to kind of form like a blockade around it somehow so that they can't just easily go to points, because very often here you will see that players can't really take any points outside of their own for more than one turn, because if the red player ever tries to take either this or this point, the blue player can just summon something and immediately hit whatever they have there, and it is very easy to defend those points because of that. So the big problem with that is the vault here. I actually think that Hall of Mirrors has potential to be a good map. All you really have to do is move the vaults back and get rid of the poison tile in front of them. So you do something like this. If you want to keep poison in here, I guess you can like put it in the corners just for the visual effect. Doesn't really have any effect here. But this way you would see that now you suddenly have more contestable panic points, because now both of these points are technically speaking contestable. I would maybe see some players just break this with Gravedigger to sort of make that disappear, but it would at least make it way better than it is right now. And then maybe you also want to move the heart a little bit further in, and that could make the map actually fun. I don't know exactly how you would move the heart, but let's just say that you maybe like move it one step forward or something like that. Or you could maybe even move it down to where the block is. I don't know where the exact best spot is for this stuff. This is just some example of how you maybe could modify the map to make it a little bit more fun to play on. Next up, we're going to be looking at some of the actually very good maps that they have released. Although at this point, with how they are releasing maps, I'm starting to think that they really don't understand how to actually make maps at all. I'm not even starting to think that, I'm pretty sure. So whenever I see them make an actually good map or a great map like Red Rum, that's more luck than it's them actually knowing what they're doing at this point. Which is a little bit of a rude thing to say, but it's the truth if we're being honest here. Red Rum is a fantastic map though. This is a map where you can see that both players have equally far to the panic points pretty much. The hearts are far enough out that they are vulnerable. The blocks actually make it so that you're fighting in the middle, which is great, because you have this space here that you're fighting in at that point, which is very nice. Sometimes you will also see people fight a little bit on the sides, which can be pretty fun. You have a healing spa, which is sitting far enough back that you lose tempo if you want to use it. Sometimes people or the devs will put the healing spas very far into the map, like here for example, or even one tile behind that. And that will make it way too easy to use them, and you don't really lose your like advantage on the map, even though you are using a healing spa, which is also bad because it makes the map way too defensive if you can just do that. So this is a very good map, because if you just look at it, like you have 5 tiles over here, the other player has 4, both players have 4 to the middle, and that's just a very good dynamic because both players have the ability to contest all of the points on this map. You can go for 2 movement, 2 range phobia here, and then you can contest all of this. In theory, I guess you would have to move to contest the bottom one, but you get what I'm saying. And this means that you can both play aggressive, you can play slow, you can play a lot of different play styles here, and it's just overall very fun for everyone involved, because you are not really forced to do one specific thing, and it just forces you to actually play the game, because otherwise you will still die. But you don't necessarily have to play super aggressive. You can also play for turrets and make that your game plan. Then we have Detention. Detention is a bit of a special one that I wanted to include here, because it actually only has 2 contestable panic points, and yet it is still a very good map. The reason why it's still good, even though it only has these 2 points being contestable, because the other ones here are obviously very easy to like hold on to by just walking out here and hitting. So these aren't really contestable panic points, but the corner ones near the heart are both contestable. And the reason why this map is still good, even though it only has 2 points that are contestable, is that the heart is very easy to attack, because you can go around here and start hitting them, and that makes it pretty easy to go for a hard rush. So if you're making a map where the panic points are less contestable, you can make up for it by having a heart that is more vulnerable. That is not to say that you can't defend your heart here, of course, because you don't want a map where people are just hard rushing each other. But you can like break blocks like this, and then you can go over here and defend your heart. You can also bring lobbers and hit over the blocks to defend your heart. So there is a lot of ways to still stay defensive. You can also just walk a turret over here, and that will help you be defensive if you really want to defend your heart and go for a slower playstyle. So you can do both things, and both things are perfectly viable. But the main thing here is that you are encouraged to actually interact with your opponent, which is very, very important. Because if you just sit back on Detention and do nothing and try to bank for like a Blast-O-Matic too early on, you will just die, which is how it should be. You should be punished for just banking and doing nothing in like a map where you are supposed to actually play, because you are supposed to play the game. You shouldn't just sit back and do nothing for a while, get a giant Phobie and then win the game. If that was the entire game, then it would be very boring to play Phobies. Finally, we have one of the new maps that I wanted to highlight, because they haven't only made bad maps. This is actually a decent one. I wouldn't say this is a perfect map, but it is pretty good. What you see almost every time on this map is that the players are going to break one of these blocks, and then it gets into a scenario where you have a very similar dynamic to what you saw on Detention there, because the heart is fairly approachable, and you have 2 contestable panic points, which are these 2, that both players will have equally far to, on top of the heart being vulnerable. And then, like I said, you have a very similar scenario to what you saw on Detention just a second ago. Like, you can just imagine the map looking like this, and then the points here are both uncontestable like on Detention, and these are both contestable points. So very similar idea, and this is overall a pretty good map in my opinion because of that. Now that's not to say that I think this is a perfect map though, because I think you are almost forced to go for a Gravedigger or some very specific flyers you can maybe play for, like a Microscopic here, but it's a little bit on the side of maybe it's forcing Gravedigger too much, which is not a great thing, but it is still a pretty good map. This is definitely not a map that I will be complaining about having in the game. And now finally here, I want to talk a little bit more about the concepts that I mentioned in the beginning of the video, because they are a lot easier to explain when I have the actual map creator in front of me like this, and I can show you what I mean visually. First of all, we're just going to throw down a couple of vaults here. I'm placing them in opposite corners because that is the easiest way of making a map where both players have equally far to the panic points. It's obviously not the only way that you can do it. There are several ways, but this is just like for a showcase. Then we will put a panic point in the middle because both players will obviously have equally far to it. And then by placing the panic points like this on the sides, both players end up having 4 tiles to walk to every panic point in the map. And it's obviously the same over here. And that is a very good dynamic because that means that both players are equally able to like actually contest their panic points in here. And that encourages them to interact with each other and try to fight for the panic points. So this is a very common setup that you will see on a lot of the good maps in the game. Obviously you would also have a heart somewhere and probably some blocks and a little bit more to actually make it exciting. This is just to kind of showcase what it was I meant by having these in here. This is not, however, the only way you can do it. You could also say, oh, I really want to make this map a little bit more interesting by having the panic points in the corners. Now, obviously, right now, it is way too easy for the players to just take the panic point near their corner because they can go directly to it and the opponent cannot ever take it, really. So what you want to do is you want to place some blocks down so that they can't just take this. For example, we could like place the hearts in here, and then we can do like a wraparound with a wall like this. I made one of those green. Whoops. And now you will see that both players actually have a much further distance to the panic point over here, which means you can't just easily like fight over it with a 2 movement, 2 range phobie. You can still do that with a flyer, but then you're playing for a flyer on a map that doesn't really reward flyers in any other way. So I think that's fine, and you can still play aggressive as the red player there and force them to go for the flyers. So you would see here you have to go all the way around here to get to this point, and the red player would also have to go all the way over here to get to that point. So this creates a dynamic where you have a corner point and it actually matters. So you still have 3 very contestable panic points, and then these in the corners, which are also kind of contestable. They're like semi-contestable, I would say, because of course you can hit them with something from the vault, but it's not that hard to really back off an offensive push here with something else. So if you're going in there to take that panic point, you're probably also placing something here alongside it. So if they go for a murder wing, you will be able to fight back against it. And that makes for a pretty interesting dynamic. Of course, this isn't necessarily like a perfect map or anything. I'm not insanely good at creating maps either, but I can definitely identify whenever we get a bad one, like HR Violation. That is just straight up a terrible map, and you can see that the second that you look at it. Of course, this is not the only way that you can make maps. You could also choose to say, I want a setup like this. But if you do this, you obviously have to block off these top or bottom points, because otherwise it is way too easy for one player to take it and way too hard for the other. Right now, the red player has to walk 5 tiles for this bottom point, whereas the blue player only has to walk 3 tiles, and the opposite way for the top point, obviously. And you can do a lot against that by just like placing down some blocks like this. Now they have 4 tiles to walk to get here, and the other player also has the same thing, and that makes it a little bit more equal. You could also maybe try and throw a heart in here, and that would maybe make it even harder to actually get to this point. Maybe you're doing too much then, I don't know. But this could be some kind of setup that you do like this if you really want to make a map like that. You could also choose to say, oh, I want the panic point or the vaults to mirror each other exactly like this. So then they are exactly opposite each other. What this means is, of course, that if you have a panic point here, it is way too easy for both players to contest if there is nothing in front, because they can hit it with a 2 movement, 2 range phobie, and you don't really want that. So either you have to place all of the panic points at the top, or you have to block for the panic point at the bottom. You could also choose to do both things. So if you're going to block for it, we have a very similar idea to before. You could maybe block it like this. This still keeps some space open in the middle to fight on. And then you would want more panic points and probably also the hearts near the top, so the players are forced to go near the top and can't just use vault stuff constantly. Because if you're fighting up here at the top half of the map and you have a couple more blocks, then you would actually not be able to like snowball things and stuff like that. We could just try and do a quick example of how that maybe looks like this. Then we throw down some panic points, some hearts. We throw down a bunch of blocks like this. Okay, that's maybe a bad one because we'll be blocking too much in the middle. You could do something like this maybe. Now both players have equally far to all of the panic points. There's at least 4 tiles here, so you cannot just use a 2 movement, 2 range phobie unless it's a flyer. And you would also have to walk all the way up here to take these points at the top. You can be aggressive at the top to hit the opponent's heart if they are playing too passively. If you really wanted to completely block them from being able to hit on this middle one, you could also choose to do something like this. Although at that point you have very limited space to be on here, so maybe you are making the map a little bit like too congested or whatever you want to call it at this point. But this could be a way that you set up this map. if you really want to mirror the vaults in this kind of way, I would say this is probably better. But you could do something like this. You could also choose to say, oh, I want my vaults in a more interesting position. But if you do that, you really have to work around it. So for example, if we want the vaults in the middle here, that of course is going to mean that if we have a panic point in the middle, again, it is way too easy to reach, which means we have to block our phobies from being able to do so. A easy way to do this would be to put the heart in front wherever you would want to place the 2 movement to range phobie. So we could just do something like this. And then maybe we also make it so that it's not so easy to walk around here by placing in a couple of abyss tiles. Then we can also have some panic points out here at the sides, with which both players will not be able to hit with a 2 movement to range phobie, and they will obviously have equally far to them. And this could also be an interesting way of doing a map where you actually have the vaults near the middle, and that is like very unique compared to some of the other maps that I talked about. This is a lot harder to make a good map for though, so if you are newer to map making or you're just bad at it like the developers are, then maybe you want to start out by just making some maps with corner vaults, because that is a lot easier to balance and make actually fun. So this could be a way that they do it. This is just like the very standard setup that they should be doing for a lot of their maps. Anyway though, that was all I really had to talk about here. I don't want to play around here too much because I could sit in this map creator for a very long time and talk about this stuff. These are just like the most interesting points and most important things to remember whenever you make a map. So I hope that someone from the dev team that actually makes these maps or has some influence sees this, because I think this would make the game a lot more enjoyable to play, especially for high rank players, which currently have essentially an experience where you see the map and you know whether you're going to be enjoying your match or not, which I think is very sad, because it means that almost half the maps in the game you queue up on and you just want to immediately surrender or quit the match, because you know it's going to be a boring game in like 99% of cases. But thank you for watching. If you have anything to add, feel free to leave a comment, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.